please welcome the co-content chairs for TiEcon 2014, Naveen Bisht and Rajiv Patel.
As you know, we have a packed agenda focused on 3 disruptive and hot technologies: big data, Internet of Things, and cloud infrastructure. The format for each track will be a combination of keynotes, 30-minute panels, and 15-minute fireside chats.
We made it very compact with many industry experts so you can get as much as possible in a day. Now, I would like to introduce Anand Chandrasekher, currently Senior Vice President at Qualcomm, responsible for leading enterprise and data center initiatives. Prior to Qualcomm, Anand was Senior Vice President at Intel. During his 24 years at Intel, Anand held various executive roles and is best known for his pioneering efforts on Intel's Centrino platform that helped Intel move into the modern era of mobility. Anand received his bachelor's, master's, and MBA degrees from Cornell University and is a big supporter and charter member of TiE Silicon Valley. Anand is going to introduce our next grand keynote. So let's give him a big round of applause and welcome him on the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, guys. And Naveen, thank you for that warm welcome. Welcome to TiEcon 2014. It's a great honor for Qualcomm to be kicking this off. And there's a lot that's going on, and it's a fantastic time also to be an entrepreneur. If the 80s were really the decade of empowerment through the PC, and the 90s were really the decade of empowerment through the internet and the birth of great companies like Google and others, this decade is certainly about mobile and cloud, and it's a very logical progression in some ways. If PCs were about personal empowerment, mobile is certainly about the ultimate tool for personal empowerment and enrichment. And if the internet was about backend and cloud, certainly what we see today on cloud is far more dominant and disruptive than what we saw in the past. And taken together, though, the opportunities are even more disruptive. And today, I'm privileged to introduce an individual who's had a frontline seat at both of those trends as they've been developing. And I'm talking about here my boss, Steve Mollenkopf. Steve joined Qualcomm in 1994 as an engineer. He's had a frontline seat at watching mobile really take off and become as big as it is and disrupt many industries in its wake. In 2008, he was running he took over the chipset business at Qualcomm. In 2011, he took over the role of president and COO for the company. And as of March 2014, he's the CEO for Qualcomm. So very impressive individual, very human, very down to earth. I happen to know him quite well, and I like, respect, and enjoy working for him. Steve's discussion is going to be moderated by the gracious Mohan Gyani. Mohan himself is no stranger to wireless. Mohan was CFO at AirTouch, and then he became CEO at AT&T Wireless Mobility, which he took public. And since then, he's still involved in mobile and cloud in the form of an investor and an advisor. Please join me in giving a fantastic TiEcon welcome to both of these outstanding individuals. I thought maybe we need to do that again.
Thank you. Anand, thank you. Thank you very much. Please. Good morning, everybody. Morning. That's right. Let's get the energy going, okay? Hey, I see a timer here, so we don't have too much time, and I want to get down to some meaty stuff. But before I do that, Steve, I was telling Steve earlier on that I know Qualcomm from many years ago. At AirTouch, we were the first commercial deployment of CDMA in the world. And at one time, we owned 5% of this wonderful company. I'm sorry to have to admit that somewhere along the line, we sold it. But Steve, I went and did a little research. I went and asked some people, what's Qualcomm? And that's clearly not the people in this crowd. But I got answers ranging from, well, they have something to do with sports. I think they own a stadium. Yeah. I had somebody else who said, something to do with wireless or communications. So before we start, just to make sure I'm not making an assumption here, would you tell us in your own words, what is Qualcomm?
Sure. Sure. By the way, just a quick aside on before I answer the question. That even extends to my kids. When my daughter was very young, she heard me talking about chips all the time, and then she finally asked me, "Are the chips salty? What kind of chips do you work on?" And so that, it's amazing the degree to which you have to educate people about what you do. You spend your entire life on, even though it consumes what you do most of the time. But no, we're a technology company, and we try to invest in kind of the core technology that's needed for, let's say, big changes in the industry. Mm-hmm. And then we try to be fairly flexible in the way in which we go to market, always through partners. And so we've had a lot of things in the history of the company, and I'm sure we'll have many things moving forward. And we've settled down really on two main businesses. One is a technology licensing business, which is actually most of the profit comes from there. And then we have the chipset business, which is the area that most people know us about, just because that's where the physical product is, tends to be. And that's a business that really grew from nothing. We didn't have it. In fact, when you were working with us, you probably remember, we didn't have a semiconductor business. We did semiconductors, but only for really to demonstrate and be able to scale the technology. And then one thing led to another, and we were able to be successful in that area. So we really view ourselves as a technology company, and very much at the system level, trying to stitch together different types of technologies, and that's where we tend to find the most value that we've created.
And you're being very modest, but as I understand it, you're either the largest or very close to the largest semiconductor market cap company in the world. And
Yeah.
I've been watching you do that over the years, and congratulations. So a question again on your role changed recently. You've been with Qualcomm a long time,
Yeah.
but as the CEO and a couple of months into it, does that change your perspective? Do you have an agenda that's different from what there was?
Well, I mean, I've been at the company for 20 years, and the short answer to your question is yes, but it's not in the ways that people think. I mean, it's easier to get people to do things today, which is surprising. I didn't actually expect that, but it actually does happen. But a lot of what you do day to day is actually the same. And we've been very fortunate as a company to have a lot of continuity in the management team up and down the ranks. Mm-hmm. And it's a very technical company. And my background is in engineering. Most of my tenure at Qualcomm was actually in engineering, which is not unlike many of the other folks as well. So it's engineers find it easy to talk to engineers, and since we're a technology company, it's been somewhat of a natural transition. So, but it's been fun. We're at a point in the company where we're trying to spend a lot of time figuring out what's next, and we're at I think Anand said it very well. We're on a ringside seat to a lot of the changes in the industry, and it's just a fascinating time to be in technology, given what's happening, the impact of the cloud, what's happening on the device level, and it's just an exciting time.
So can we talk a little bit about the importance of scale and, say, for example, the IP portfolio that you have?
Sure.
And I think about a company your size, history rich with innovation, and then I think about all these people out here and the companies that they are probably associated with, young, nimble, fast. How do you manage your business and continue that theme of innovation?
Sure. Well, one is I think the culture of a place is very, very important. It's probably the most strategic asset that you have, mm-hmm. is the culture. And that tends to be the thing that gets you through periods of uncertainty or where you don't know what to do. And that's where culture kind of picks up and carries the ball when you don't know exactly where to go, which people think in big companies is very rare, but it actually happens quite a lot. And we've had to reinvent ourselves a number of times, what technology we've had to learn and add areas. And your question about scale is important because scale gives you the ability to do things that other companies can't do, but it also sows the seeds of things that can be very difficult. So for example, people can rely on scale and it'll get you through for some period of time, but you'll lose some of the key things that got you there. So innovation, being nimble, learning from your mistakes, actually talking about your mistakes, those things are are what keeps a company successful over the long term. And so we look at small companies and we say, wow, we want to make sure that we can continue to do the same things that they do. What we've been fortunate enough is that we work in a particular space that requires a lot of focus. So we have a very concentrated, really customer base, but we have an enormous partner base. So our direct customers are really, much smaller than a lot of other companies in terms of raw numbers. But we deal with a lot of ecosystem players, and we try to be the behind-the-scenes partner for technology, and that tends to be a good place to be. And our scale allows us to get into the door, essentially.
Sure. And so what advice do you have for these younger companies? Should they look at you and Qualcomm as somebody that they can hopefully partner with, or do you look at them as these are threats and potential things that I need to squash?
It's probably a mix of both, probably both directions.
He's honest.
I would assume. But I think, I would say this, I think we do like to partner with people. And even big companies, the surface area of what your ambitions are, you can't cover it all. And there's a lot of area for people to innovate with you on your platform into new areas and things like that. So with us, we hope to be a good partner in terms of being someone that can drive innovation moving forward. And we're all about, we want technology to be moving forward. The worst thing in the world is for technology to stagnate. And I've never seen it happen, but by and large, people underestimate the amount of technology change that will occur versus what actually occurs. I mean, which is a great thing. So working with us, hopefully, is not a bad thing. And then individual advice that I would give to people that are trying to do companies is sort of embrace the uncertainty of not knowing what you're going to do next, and focus on the important things, which are innovation and really dealing with something that make sure your ambitions are high enough. Our company, for example. Even with the ambitions that we had, and you knew them because you dealt with us back in the early days when we were trying to really move into a new area of technology, I bet you we undercalled what actually the impact was in terms of the true, if you asked people what their real ambitions were at the time. And that's really a key thing, is to keep your sights high and pay attention to what's important. And what's important is actually technology, innovation, and making the changes along the way that get you to be successful.
You talked about technology and the pace of change, and I absolutely agree. Consistently in this wireless industry, we have underestimated the pace of change. But is there such a thing as change too fast? And my question is, here we are already beginning to talk quite a bit about 5G.
Yeah.
And most of the world still hasn't even deployed 3G properly and probably never will at this stage. So is there such a thing as too much too fast?
I'll tell you, I think the implication of people getting onto the internet and ultimately embracing what will happen in the cloud is pretty strong worldwide, and the cost points that are being driven, I think it's going to be it is already a worldwide wave. It's going to continue. But what's interesting is that we get asked a lot about things like 5G and evolutions of 4G, and there's an aspect of people arguing what the names are, but the trend that's undeniable is that what people can envision doing and what you can deliver to them today, there's always a gap. And the way we joke about it internally is that if you look at a science fiction movie and you look at what we actually do, there's still a gap. As long as there's a gap, then there's something good for kind of everybody here in the Valley and other places. And you can imagine how to get there, actually. And so today, I just think that there's so much more that we can do with the networks to enable a new class of services, or to enable developers to do things, to really embrace the fact that the device is in your pocket, or the device that you're interacting with is a sea of sensors, like the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things, I think, is an overused term. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. It means nothing to a lot of people, actually.
Right.
But there's going to be a lot of intensity in terms of investment in those areas, and I think it's a good time to be in technology, I think, because of all the change that will be happening.
You use the term the cloud, and obviously that's one of the themes over here. I call it, we have these flavors of the year that keep coming, and today the cloud is one of them, big data is another one, Internet of Things is another one. So let's talk about the cloud for a minute. How does that affect Qualcomm and the way you approach the market?
Sure.
In a world where more and more is moving to the cloud?
Sure. So, the way that we look at even smartphones is, if you look at smartphones, and we knew this some time ago, that we knew that the people that were going to be strong on the smartphone OS needed to have a cloud-based service in order to really be successful. And if you look at what people are doing on smartphones, it's essentially a veneer, depending on what service. It could be a thin veneer or a thick veneer, of a bunch of cloud-based services, or a developer platform that enables a bunch of really cloud-based services delivered into your smartphone. So the smartphone growth really was driven by a whole combination, portfolio of services that are delivered via the OS that people put on there. And we knew that, we embraced that. We did two things. We really wanted to make sure the networks were capable of taking advantage of that. And then we needed to make sure that there was a mobile computing platform that embraced multiple technologies. So graphics, connectivity, modem, CPU, all of the multimedia things that we do. We knew we had to get that in a cost point and a physical size that would enable that to be what you've seen, obviously, in the industry. But moving forward, the demand is for each one of these smartphones to essentially talk to what I think will be hundreds of devices per day, walking by a sea of sensors and connected to a lot of them, and people trying to monetize everything that you see. And there's really, from a Qualcomm perspective, there's really two sort of limits that will happen. One is the cloud will want so much bandwidth to go back that the pipe needs to be much greater than what it is today. That's a good thing for Qualcomm. That means that the network and the modem continues to evolve at a tremendous pace. That's good. The other approach is that somewhere out at the edge of the network, there's an intelligent decision deciding how much data to send back.
Right.
And it'll be a combination of those two things will be the reality. Both of them are things that look like opportunities for us as a company. Now, the edge of the network, and I'm not putting the phone at the edge of the network, I'm actually saying it's further than that. Like your wrist would be the edge of the network, your heart sensor would be the edge of the network, your car, what have you. That is a very wide open space. It looks different than the phone space. The phone space tends to be combined a lot of technology, complexity across multiple technology areas. But I think the edge of the network will be just this tremendous fan out. And what I'm excited about is when we see that, there tends to be a lot of innovation from our partners. And so what we try to do is provide technology that enables people to get into that game without a large level of investment.
Right.
And then they innovate in ways that we would never have imagined using technology that we tried to give them. So I think that is going to be very, very exciting.
So what does that mean for you guys in terms of how you interact with developers and developers of platforms, developers of applications? Yep. Today, there are those who would argue Qualcomm isn't really very well known or part of their ecosystem.
Yep.
What changes?
Well, that's where the scale thing comes in that you mentioned before. I think we're a tremendous partner to people that are trying to scale to a large number of developers. So, we've worked very early on with Google on Android, and I think really lent our scale to help that get quickly. If you go back and really look at what happened, we made that go very, very quickly because we were able to use that scale. It was a great partnership. Of course, we were not the only ones. There are a lot of other people also doing it, and same thing with a lot of the other cloud-based providers. Same thing happens internationally. So we tend to have strong relationships with people that are trying to figure out how can I get my service on 200 million devices in a quarter, which is kind of the rate that we're selling devices, which is much larger than any individual OEM. It's actually larger. In a year, we will pass more data through Qualcomm chips than you will see one individual ecosystem, for example. So as the technology tends to be implemented in the device, we tend to be actually a very, very strong partner to the people that enable the developers, if that makes sense. So the strength and the interaction that you got to know the company about as a carrier, where we were looking at scaling cellular systems and getting them onto the digital domain. We do the same thing really with cloud-based providers today. It's just not in a commercial sense, or people don't see it, their grandparents don't know about it, their wife doesn't know about it, but we're very, very active behind the scenes creating the technology that allows this to happen on a worldwide basis.
So you mentioned that there's all this data that's going through your chipsets. Is this data that you guys can mine in some way, or does that belong to the carriers? Do you have a big data play? Or?
We don't. We don't. In fact, we're very cautious about one of the advantages, there's an advantage and a disadvantage to working with so many partners. And the advantage is, obvious, but the disadvantage is that you need to make sure you understand what you're good at and what you're not good at, and where you conflict with your partners. And I think we're very, very, really through a lot of iteration, we've determined kind of where we play best and where we can actually take advantage of the core competency of the company.
So let's switch directions a little bit and talk about this thing called the Internet of Things that, as you say, means many different things to different people. What does that mean to Qualcomm? Is this, you hear this thing about, there are going to be billions and billions of things connected to each other. On the surface, I think that should be a really good thing for you, but tell me more about it.
Well, I think when we look at the Internet of Things, and remember, we have both a very strong cellular business. We also have, we're strong actually in the networking business as well as wireless LAN outside of mobile, actually. So routers and a number of things, power line communications, a number of areas. And we look at that portfolio of technology that you have to develop to be strong in the smartphone and the infrastructure that makes the internet go at the edge. And we look at that and we say, well, what's going to be important to be successful in the Internet of Everything? It's going to be those same devices or same technologies. And in fact, they will all be connected together. So we look at it as an extension of our existing business. And then the question really is, because it's such a large surface area, where are you going to play and where are you not going to play? And we are right now building the portfolio of products and technologies that enable that to happen. And still, as you know, very, very early in the Internet of Everything. And so we're building a number of technologies that we think can make it easier for people to really take advantage of the dream that people talk about. So going back to your question about scale, we think that scale is very important in that business as well. And I think you'll hear later on today, I think one of my colleagues will talk a bit about how at the software layer, we're trying to make it very easy for people to pair devices and across platform, and just that's really to make sure that we can deliver on the very, very large surface area that's going to exist.
Let me change directions once again. There seems to be a general belief that the continuing growth of smartphones and the sale of smartphones will continue, but that growth is more likely going to come in the mid-tier to lower-tier devices. If that happens, and you'll also see in the higher-end phones where the operators, at least in this country, have begun to reduce the subsidies that they provide for new activations. What does that imply for your business? How do you compete with, say, somebody like a MediaTek at the lower end, or do you even want to compete there?
Well, we've been actually very successful in driving the mid-tier and the low-tier. Part of our business strategy is to see the transition of 2G networks onto 3G and onto 4G. And part of that is getting the cost structure right. So we've been, I think, fairly successful in doing that. If you look at our numbers, I think we're actually adding customers in that area, which is good. Now, if you look at the growth of the high-end segments relative to what it was, let's say, a couple of years ago, the growth rate is not as high, but it's also still growing. And technology continues to be very, very important. And what happens is the technology innovation is not only at the high end. So a lot of that IP actually trickles down to the mid-tier and the low-tier. And what we do when we see growth in particular areas is we really focus the IP roadmap where the growth is.
Got it.
And one of the advantages of having scale is you have the cost structure and the ability, the assets in order to do that. But I would say in general, I don't see the world as dark as maybe that view, might suggest, in the sense that today the networks are really trying to figure out how they embrace. There's a big gap between the amount of data that people want to get on their devices and the amount of data that can be delivered economically. And so we talk about this 1000x vision, which essentially is that the network will become very, very dense and the network infrastructure will be very, very cheap and easy to deploy. And should we solve this as an industry, and we're spending a lot of time on it as well as others, and I'm sure there are people in this room that are working on this, that really creates an opportunity for the operators and the wireline operators, the wireless operators, to really merge their business models. And a lot of the capability of providing unlimited data, for example, into your pocket or onto your wrist or into your car or what have you, I think there'll be a lot of innovation from the perspective of services if they have the ability to really get a lot of data back and forth. And that network migration is yet to happen, and we're spending a lot of time trying to create the technology that will enable that to happen. So I think there's still innovation left over. You're also seeing innovation actually in the pricing of devices to try to convince and to work on opportunities to get additional devices onto networks. And so it's not all, at the silicon or software or service level. People are innovating at the business model level as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you totally on that. I've said for a while that for the operators, one of the next places for innovation for them is in their pricing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room for innovative pricing.
Yeah.
Talking about moving into adjacent markets for a minute, the other word that you hear nowadays is wearables. And every now and then I scratch my head and I say, wearables, okay, I saw a few of these things that go on. Health monitoring.
Yep.
Have you seen any other applications? Are you excited about this space?
We are. We actually, I think health, wireless health, which in many respects is not a technical problem, is an area of great opportunity for people. Now, it's difficult opportunity. It's not as easy for VCs to get an exit, actually. And so you worry about you worry sometimes about is there enough innovation going there? But the ability for the healthcare industry to embrace the IT innovations that have occurred in other industries and have yet to occur are pretty immense. Now there are things about how devices work and how approvals work and how data is managed, how people's security and privacy are maintained that are difficult issues. But if you were to unlock innovation and technology into that industry, which is a huge, huge industry that has a pretty large burden on the GDP of some large countries, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for people to do. That's just one area. Now, what we see, the way we look at when people come out with devices, and we actually are guilty of this, come out with a device and it doesn't work, that doesn't mean that the category isn't. It means that there's innovation occurring and people are experimenting. And that's what you're seeing. And then someone will figure it out, and then there'll be this tremendous amount of scale applied to that problem, and then someone will move on to the next problem. And that's what I think you're seeing in the wearable space. People don't know exactly what the design point is, what consumers will put up with, how they deal with, do I need a fashion brand, how do I deal with the supply chain. To us, that's just a really interesting opportunity. And then I would just, a little bit about Qualcomm. We purposely think, well, let's make sure that we're doing some of this. We want to make sure that we're doing things that fail and operating in the new markets, because that's when you learn about what technologies you need. And the last thing you want in a company is to have 100%. You don't want to bat 100% or 1,000%. Excuse me, 1,000. Bat 1,000, because that means that you're not setting your ambitions high enough.
That's good advice. So as we're running out of time, just one last theme. Most people in this room, I'm going to guess, and you think about mind share and getting their share of mind. The names that come to mind are companies like Apple, like Google, like Facebook. And it's probably not as much Qualcomm. Anything you want to tell them as to why they should be having more of their mind share devoted to Qualcomm?
It's funny. People know us. They seem to know us, reasonably well. But we're not. You're not going to see us on the. They're not going to make TV shows about Qualcomm, I guess.
And for any of you thinking of doing that, forget it.
Yeah. But we have. We're an innovation company. We're I think a lot like we were in the old days, where we're constantly trying to solve big problems and being the front end of things. And that's what a lot of small companies try to do, or new engineers, or wanting to get into those things. We actually feel that we have tremendous amount of ability to excite people about the company and what we're working on. So it tends not to be a big issue for us. But I do get asked a lot, do we work at the stadium or something like that? But I'll put up with it. That's okay.
You do work the stadium. You sell hot dogs.
That's right. That's right.
I have to say this, having watched Qualcomm grow up to becoming the enormous giant that it is, it's been fascinating watching the history of this company. And if I were in Steve's shoes, I'd be perhaps inside a little nervous in that here's a company with a phenomenal market share in what they do. And when you have that kind of a market share, you have only one way to go usually, and that is to go down. And yet what I see with him is this tremendous confidence and optimism, and that's very encouraging for all of us, because that innovation and that drive for innovation by some of these larger companies is what is going to give the fuel for the smaller companies to continue to innovate. So with that, Steve, I want to thank you very much for your time this morning, and thank you, audience. Please join me in giving Steve a good hand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Yep.